So I hear there's a party today. Very exciting. It's such an honor to be here with you, and I'm really thankful to everyone who has worked so hard to put on the reception. I hope you will come and enjoy the food. And our scriptures today, as I was thinking about it, kind of lend themselves to what I want to do, which is a little bit of a retrospective. I thought I would give you, a la David Letterman, my top 10 insights after 30 years as a priest. So you think about Jesus calling those first disciples, what were they getting into? So here you go. I don't have any fancy graphics, but I'm going to run down my top 10 list. And then you can let me know what you think afterwards, if you agree or disagree. So the first insight I would say is perhaps for me the most important. And it's true whether we are clergy or whether we are lay people. And it is this, that when it comes to our calling from God and our ministry, it's not about us. It's not about us. You have had at St. Philip's or wherever churches you've been, many priests, and each one has certain strengths and certain weaknesses, right? There's no perfect priest. There's no perfect parish, right? We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. And in the end, it is not about us. It's not about, like the great hymn says, how great I art, right? That's not the hymn. It's how great thou art. The focus needs to be on the presence of God in Christ through the Holy Spirit in our midst. The focus is how are we, each one of us, living into the calling that we have received to follow Jesus in our own imperfect way. So that's my first insight. It's not about us in the end. There will be different priests in this pulpit and altar for years to come. Each one is going to bring something important. Each one of us, in this time that we have together, we are stewards of this place and this community for the time that we have together. That's the key insight for me. That's number one. All right, number two, and this is kind of related, and I learned this when I graduated from seminary. I was kind of having a crisis. When I graduated from seminary, I felt very unworthy to be a priest, and then I had fallen in love with Susan, who's now my wife, and I was trying to figure out how we were going to do this as a clergy couple, and it seemed impossible. I was just full of angst and doubts. And God spoke to me in the midst of that and said, look, I'm not calling you to a career, because I had in my mind, the problem with getting married to Susan was, how is this going to work as a career, right? How are we going to do the things that we need to do? And God said, no, I'm not calling you to a career. I'm calling you to a vocation. And that is very different. So as I look back over 30 years, I have followed no one's idea of a career path. It's funny, I had friends in seminary who were very ambitious, and they had mapped out their career in the church. They knew at what age they wanted to be a cardinal rector of a big wealthy church, and then at what age they thought they should be elected bishop, and probably when they were going to be Archbishop of Canterbury. I don't know. But they had the career ladder all mapped out. And it was, I have to tell you, it was super freeing to hear from God that the vocation, not the career, was the call. Because then there's freedom in that. There's freedom, as one of my bishops once told me, to bloom where you're planted. So I've spent my career mostly following my wife around. When she got a job in Buffalo, we moved to Buffalo, New York. Then we moved together to a parish in Jamestown. And then she got a job in Michigan. So I followed her to Michigan. I thought, what am I going to do in Michigan? So I was an interim for a while, and then I worked for the diocese. Then I heard about this church in Rochester. And I remember seeing it on my bicycle. I was riding my bike through town, and I thought, hey, there's an Episcopal church. And it's on the bike path from my house. Wouldn't it be cool to end up in a church that I could ride my bike to? Little knowing that we would be here now celebrating these really wonderful 6 years together. It's hard to believe it's been 6 years. All right, that's number two. Number three, I believe, and I know it's been true from talking to people at St. Philip's, that spiritual vitality ultimately comes from a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I know that sounds evangelical, but that is what I believe. And when I look at the people who were the faithful core of St. Philip's, who made it through all the tough times, it was people who had been through spiritual renewal of one kind or another and who had a deep and personal abiding relationship with God in Christ. That's what sustains us. That's what gives us our energy. And it's easy to forget that amidst all the busyness of church life, right? We got to work about the flat roof. That's our topic for next week, the annual meeting. We got to talk about buildings and grounds and pledges and stewardship, and we got to work on all this stuff. It's easy to forget that what we're really about is our walk with Christ. It was Jesus calling those first disciples that led them to transform their lives, and it is still the same today. Jesus comes to us in our fishing boats, whatever they look like, and says, "Follow me." Will we follow? That's key. All right, that's number 3. Number 4, perfection is overrated. Perfection is overrated. So I am married to a perfectionist, and there's a number of perfectionists in every church that I have served. And truth to tell, deep down in each of us, there's a little bit of a perfectionist. We always feel like we're not quite measuring up. Things have to be just right. If they're not just right, we get uptight and bent out of shape. And I believe that perfectionism is a terrible idol. Right? We are called not to be perfect because we will always fail at that. We're called to offer our best to God and to be okay with failures. There's times when we get off track in the song, just to pick one example. And it is okay. I used to get really uptight when I was first ordained. You know, if the acolytes moved at the wrong time, I'd be like, oh, people are going to be really upset about this. The church service has to be just perfect. I was never worshiping, right? I would go to church and I was not worshiping. I was freaking out over perfectionism. And one of the gifts of getting older and being at this for a while is I no longer care. I think it's hilarious when things go poorly. I really enjoy that because we are offering our best. My organist, Jonathan's uncle, used to pray every Sunday before our worship service when we gathered as a choir. He would say, "Okay, choir," and he was a perfectionist, ultimately, like the nth degree. But he would say, "Okay, choir, let it flop to the glory of God." So that's kind of my mantra, right? Let it flop to the glory. There's another besetting sin that churches often have, and as we as human beings, and that's my number 5, and that's we tend to live too much either in an idealized future, like when things are going to be perfect someday, or in an idealized past, right? The 7 last words of the church are, "We've never done it that way before." Or, "Father so-and-so wouldn't have done that," right? So my 5th one is nostalgia can be toxic, right? We should honor the past, but we should beware of living in the past, right? Because for me, the key is to live in the present, to know, as St. Benedict taught so long ago, that one of the keys to our spiritual life is to experience God in the here and now, to know that we have everything that we need, that God is present in this place, in these relationships, that the grass is not greener on the other side. When I was, I've known a lot of priests who move around every few years because they're still looking for that perfect parish. Like, well, when I get to the next one, it'll be perfect. Or I once had a parishioner when I was in a little mission church. I was 2 years out of seminary, and they put me in charge of a church, which I still find hilarious. And she told me my first week on the job, I was meeting with everybody. She said, "My husband and I are leaving this church." I said, what? Was it something I did? I've been there like 5 minutes. I said, no, it's just that this church is not nice. The people here aren't very nice. Well, I come to find out the parish had thrown that they had gotten married about a year before, and the parish had thrown them a beautiful wedding reception at no cost. So I was like, not very nice. Well, she wanted to move on. So she went and she joined every Episcopal church in that county over a period of 5 years. And because each church was perfect, and then it was terrible, and then it was perfect, and then it was terrible. So when I was about to leave that little mission church, she came back and rejoined. I said, why are you here? She said, I found out that the grass isn't always greener. And she said, I have to really wrestle with this idea that maybe it's me. So maybe it's us, right? God is here. Nostalgia for an idealized past or hope for an ideal future robs us of the beauty of this moment. Let's celebrate God's presence right now in this time with these people. I was also joking at 8 o'clock that we also idealize a particular moment in the church's life. And I know exactly when that was. It was 1965, the year I was born. That was the high watermark for membership in the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church and the Methodist Church and the Lutheran Church. 1965 was the top. It was the culmination of the baby boom years, right? Churches were full. Sunday schools were full. People were bursting at the seams. 1965. Well, I take full responsibility that since then, my entire life, the church has been declining. I know it must be me. But right, we picked that moment, and for most of the people in this room, that was what we remember, right? That's when our kids were young or when we were younger. That's the moment we hold on to, not realizing it wasn't like that in 1945. It wasn't like that in 1925. It wasn't like that in 1905. And it's not like that in 2023. We just happen to hold on to that moment, say, boy, if only we could be the church back then. Well, what if we actually were the church right now? What would that look like? Okay, enough of sermonizing about that. Number 6. We are not saved, I've come to realize, through hard experience. We are not saved by programs. What do I mean by that? I have now in 30 years been through every congregational development program that the Episcopal Church has come up with. I'm a junkie for congregational development programs. I have notebooks in my office full of the wisdom of these programs, which are all good. Like every one of them has been fascinating and good. But the next new program is not going to save us, right? What saves us is our relationship with Jesus Christ and the relationships that we have with one another. So I'm a little more jaded when I hear about a new program that's going to revolutionize the church and make us all perfect. Programs are not the answer. They can be helpful, but it is our walk with God that makes the difference. All right, moving on. Another thing I've learned, because every time I preach on this, I get the most response of any topic, and it's one that we all struggle with. And that is that forgiveness, giving forgiveness and receiving forgiveness, is perhaps the most difficult part of our spiritual journey. Only when we learn to truly forgive, to let go, because all of us have been hurt deeply in various ways by people, and all of us have hurt others in various ways. And only when we can truly learn to forgive and to be forgiven can we be set free to be joyful in our walk with God. Forgiveness is the key. It's what Jesus lived as well as preached. Father, forgive them, were among his last words on the cross. In the Lord's Prayer, he teaches us that if we want to know God's forgiveness, we must be willing to forgive others. It is at the heart of what it means to be transformed as a child of God. All right, we're coming to the end. Another thing that I've learned over the years is that when we stop learning and growing, we start dying, right? Spiritually, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. It is our ability. I mean, I talked to one person once who said, I said, you know, I never see you at any kind of classes that we do or anything like that. She said, well, you know, I was confirmed at 13. That was it. I don't need any more. Like, really? You stopped at 13. The walk with God is an endless one, right? We are always experiencing new things, learning and growing. And if we're willing to do that, God keeps renewing us. I had a retired priest friend in Jamestown who helped out. He'd been a seminary professor. He was the director of the Department of Religion at Chautauqua. And when he retired from that, he helped out at our parish. And I remember telling him once, I said, Ross, when I grow up, I want to be like you. Because he was learning up till the moment that he died. Still learning, still growing. Okay. One last one. And I remember, raise your hand if you were on the search committee 6.5 years ago when I came. So I was telling you, at 8 o'clock, I was reminiscing with Rad Jones, who was the chair of the search committee. I remember being grilled. I had 5 interviews for this job here at St. Philip's. I was well grilled by the end. And at every single one, Rad Jones would ask me, what is your vision for this parish? And I would say every time, I don't have one, right? Because, so what's your plan? My plan is to get to know the people of the parish, right? The vision comes from the community. I can't just waltz in and tell you what my vision is. Who would care about that, right? Instead, I believe, and this is probably my core belief, that it's all about relationships. In the end, it's not about how good we are at liturgy, how great the sermons are, how great our classes are, how wonderful our Sunday school is, how magnificent our choir musicians are. It's not about any of that. It is about the quality of our relationships. Because we can't have a great relationship with God if we don't have a great relationship with the community of the church. And it is the relationships in and among this community of faith which have made it a joy to be here every day of these past 6 years. I wrote in my stewardship letter last year that no matter what kind of week I've had, when I show up here at church, I am renewed with the spirit of joy. I hope you experience that as much as I do. I hope that you find in this place and these people and this community of faith something that gives you strength, equips you for your ministry, feeds you spiritually. It is my fervent prayer that we can continue to build on the wonderful work that you all have done over these past 6 years to make this a place that is joyful, that is committed to helping others, and that celebrates the presence of God with joy. Thank you for these past 6 years. May the next be as great. Amen.